When you first decide to learn a new language, especially if you're sitting at the very beginning of that journey right now, there's usually this expectation of like clean mathematics.
Oh, yeah. People want it to be simple.
Right. You probably picture yourself sitting down at a tidy desk, pulling out a fresh stack of index cards.
Hmm.
You write a word in your native language on one side and the foreign translation on the back.
Like apple equals manzana.
Exactly. It feels binary,
Yeah.
safe, organized. It gives us this really comforting illusion that human communication can just be perfectly categorized and memorized.
Which is, I mean, it's a great illusion until you actually have to use it.
Exactly. Because then you actually step off a plane in a bustling foreign city, you walk into a local coffee shop or, a business meeting, and that tiny little equation just instantly shatters.
It's totally gone.
Suddenly, the landscape of communication is murky, people are talking over each other, the pacing is totally foreign, and you realize you have absolutely no idea what is actually going on.
It is the absolute definition of jumping into the deep end without knowing how to swim.
Yeah.
We build these structured, sterile models in our heads because, well, they're easy to test in a classroom. But a language is not a math problem.
Not at all.
It is a living, breathing, and honestly deeply messy ecosystem of human behavior.
Which is actually the perfect jumping off point for our mission today. We
Wow.
are taking those traditional grammar flashcards and we are just throwing them right out the window.
Glad to hear it.
If you are that student staring up at a massive mountain of vocabulary today, this deep dive is going to hand you a completely different set of tools.
Oh,
We're exploring the psychological and cultural cheat codes of language acquisition.
and we've got some really fascinating academic materials to back this up.
We do. We are synthesizing insights from 3 great papers today. There's Metropolitan Archetypes and Cultural Dialectics, then the Psychological Bridge of Language and Culture, and finally, the third place, Edutainment and Language Acquisition.
Putting these three sources together, it creates a completely new map for the beginner student.
It really does.
We're basically moving away from rote memorization and connecting the dots between urban sociology, the physical spaces we use to learn, and actual brain chemistry.
And the core revelation across all these sources is that mastering a language isn't about memorizing a textbook.
No, not at all.
It's about stepping into a completely new psychological third place and understanding the invisible, unwritten forces that drive modern human behavior.
Right, because before we can even talk about the physical mechanics of studying from your living room, we have to fundamentally redefine what it is you're actually studying.
So let's redefine it. What are we studying?
Well, if a student believes they're merely studying a list of vocabulary words and syntax rules, they're going to hit a wall very quickly.
Oh, absolutely.
What you're actually studying is a complex, intricate web of cultural norms. And that first source, Metropolitan Archetypes and Cultural Dialectics, it frames this beautifully.
I loved how they laid this out.
Yeah, the authors argue that major urban centers, places like London, Tokyo, Moscow, they aren't just dots on a map. They serve as distinct cultural archetypes.
Okay, let's unpack this terminology for a second. Because when the paper talks about cultural dialectics between these cities, what is that actually referring to in a practical sense?
Right. So a dialectic in philosophy is basically a method of examining opposing ideas to find the truth.
Okay.
So in the context of urban sociology and language, a cultural dialectic means we look at the extreme contrast between two environments.
Mm-hmm.
We do that to reveal the hidden underlying rules of human interaction.
Ah, got it.
The paper uses a brilliant comparison. It looks at the slow-paced traditionalism found in certain Japanese business practices and contrasts that with the fast-paced cosmopolitanism of London.
Right. Two very different worlds.
Extremely different.
Yeah.
In a Tokyo boardroom, communication might heavily rely on silence, reading the room, deliberate consensus building.
Mhm.
The pacing is intentionally measured. But meanwhile, a meeting in a London startup that might be rapid fire, direct, with people constantly overlapping their sentences. The dialectic is the friction between those two realities.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that contrast is everything, right? Learning vocabulary without understanding that underlying cultural pace is it's like memorizing the script of a play but having absolutely no idea what genre it is.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Imagine you've spent months memorizing your lines perfectly. You walk out onto the stage and you deliver this casual, snappy, comedic line.
Okay.
But then you look around and you realize the rest of the cast is performing with the heavy, slow-paced, deliberate drama of a tragedy.
Yeah, you'd stick out like a sore thumb.
Your words are technically correct. I mean, you conjugated the verbs perfectly, but your delivery is completely wrong for the environment. You're going to bomb the scene because you totally misread the genre.
What's fascinating here is that this highlights the learner's true goal from day one. Your true goal, especially when you're just starting out, is not just producing words. It's observing these cultural dialectics so that you can align your communication style with the archetype of the target culture.
So you're blending in.
Exactly. By comparing the archetype of Tokyo to the archetype of London, learners gain what the source calls a meta perspective.
Meaning you're zooming out above the words themselves to see the whole board. You're looking at the why behind the social interactions rather than just the what.
Yes, and that why dictates the entire flow of the language.
How so?
Well, if you understand why a culture values indirectness, you understand why their sentence structures might place the most important information at the very end.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Right. If you don't understand the behavioral norm, the literal translation of the words is practically useless. The behavioral blueprint basically dictates the linguistic blueprint.
That paints a huge, towering picture of these metropolitan archetypes. But let's bring this down to earth for the listener for a second.
Sure.
If the goal is to grasp these deep, contrasting archetypes, how does a beginner actually achieve that? I mean, most of us are just sitting in our bedrooms or commuting to work or doing the dishes.
Yeah, we aren't all jet-setting across the globe.
Exactly. We aren't actively bouncing between boardrooms in Japan and England to absorb the vibe. So how do we get that exposure?
Which brings us right to the second paper, The Psychological Bridge of Language and Culture.
Okay, let's get into it.
The authors argue that the bridge from abstract cultural archetypes to practical everyday learning is entirely psychological. And the mechanism for building that bridge is audio immersion.
So things like podcasts.
Exactly. The paper specifically points to tools like podcasts, noting that language acquisition is a psychological process rooted in cultural immersion, not just grammar drills.
Right. The paper states that when students engage with this kind of audio, they aren't just listening to random sounds. They are actively building a psychological bridge between their current reality and the target culture.
Yes, but it emphasizes moving from passive listening to active engagement.
Meaning what, exactly?
It involves predicting and mirroring native speakers' intonation and their cultural nuances.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I have to push back on the source material here.
Uh-oh. Go for it.
I want to push back hard on this idea of predicting. Because if I'm a student at the very beginning of my journey, I might barely know how to say hello.
Right.
So how can I possibly predict a native speaker's intonation or their cultural nuance when I literally don't know the vocabulary? That sounds incredibly overwhelming, if not literally impossible.
It does sound like a tall order at first glance.
Yeah, I mean, if I don't know the words, what am I even mirroring? Am I just humming along to sounds I don't understand?
I understand the skepticism, I really do, but we have to look at how the brain actually processes sound.
Okay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of cognitive development, think about how infants learn their first language.
Oh, that's true. They don't have flashcards.
Exactly. Long before a baby understands syntax or vocabulary, they understand prosody. Yeah, prosody is the rhythm, the stress, and the intonation of speech. It's essentially the musicality of the language.
Ah, okay.
So when the paper talks about building a psychological bridge through active listening, it means tuning your brain to that prosody.
So you're saying I should be listening to the music of the language, not necessarily the lyrics.
Precisely. Think about it like this. Imagine listening to a song in a language you don't speak.
Okay.
You can still instantly tell if it's a mourning, sorrowful ballad or an aggressive, upbeat punk anthem, right?
Yeah, of course. The emotion is totally clear.
Because the emotional and cultural data is embedded in the rhythm and the tone. So when you actively listen to a podcast from Tokyo, even without knowing a single word, you can hear the cadence.
You hear the pauses and the pacing.
Yes. You hear the slow-paced deliberation, the specific length of the pauses, the deferential rise and fall of the voice.
Well, in London would be the opposite.
Exactly. Listening to a fast-paced Londoner navigating the tube, you hear the clipping energy, the sarcasm embedded in the tone, the rapid overlap of speech.
Okay, I am starting to see the mechanics of this now. Even as an absolute beginner, when I actively listen to that audio, I am training my brain's pattern recognition software to, recognize the genre of the play.
That's exactly it.
I'm absorbing the rhythm and the attitude before I even know the words.
You are mirroring the archetype. And that is what active engagement looks like on day one.
It's all about tuning the ear.
Right. Neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, it's stimulated by this kind of focused attention. You are literally tuning your ear to the frequency of a new culture.
So that is the psychological bridge.
Yes. Once your brain recognizes the structural foundation of the rhythm and the pacing, the actual vocabulary words you learn later have a solid framework to cross over on.
That makes total sense.
Without that prosodic bridge, vocabulary words are just isolated data points. They have no context.
It really takes the immense pressure off needing to know every single definition immediately. It places the value on just, well, feeling the humanity of the language first.
Exactly. It's a much more natural progression.
But to successfully practice this active mirroring, you clearly need the right environment. And our third source makes a very compelling argument that the sterile, hyper-controlled environment of a traditional textbook simply cannot facilitate this kind of neurological bridge building.
No, it really can't, because textbooks and highly sanitized language learning audio tracks, they're heavily edited.
Right, they sound like robots.
They filter out the overlapping speech, the hesitations, the slang, the background noise. Basically, they filter out the exact contextual clues your brain needs to understand the cultural archetype.
Which leads us perfectly to the concept of the third place. This third paper is called The Third Place: Edutainment and Language Acquisition.
Such an interesting concept.
It details this massive shift in online learning toward edutainment, which is, the intersection of education and entertainment. It argues that high-quality audio production, combined with authentic, unscripted dialogues, creates a digital third place for students.
Yeah, and the third place is originally a sociological concept coined by Ray Oldenburg.
Oh, I didn't know it had a specific origin.
Yeah, historically, your first place is your home. Your second place is your work or your, environments with strict hierarchies and expectations.
Places where you have to behave a certain way.
Exactly. But the third place is the pub, the local cafe, the community center. It's a space where formal structures are removed, social status is leveled, and the focus shifts entirely to genuine human connection and conversation.
So what does this all mean for the person listening to us right now?
Well, think about the pressure of a classroom.
Right. It's the difference between sitting in a rigid, silent exam room where you're terrified of mispronouncing a vowel versus just hanging out in a bustling London pub or a cozy Tokyo cafe.
Exactly. In the digital third place, you're just a fly on the wall absorbing the unscripted vibe.
And this environment gives you a safe space to practice what the paper calls shadowing techniques, right?
Let's look at the mechanics of why that safe space is biologically necessary for a beginner.
Okay, lay it on me.
In linguistics, there is a concept called the affective filter. It was developed by Stephen Krashen.
The affective filter.
Yes. It's essentially an invisible psychological barrier. When a student feels anxious, stressed, or, hyper-focused on not making a grammatical error.
Like they would in an exam room.
Exactly. Their affective filter goes up, and when this filter is high, the amygdala in the brain triggers a stress response.
Wait, really? A literal physical stress response?
Yes, a physiological reaction that literally blocks the language acquisition centers from processing new input effectively.
Wow. So the stress of trying to be perfect actually prevents the brain from learning?
It shuts the entire system down.
That is wild.
But when a student enters a third place, even a digital one created by an engaging, entertaining podcast, that anxiety drops.
Because it just feels like hanging out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The edutainment format lowers the affective filter. The brain feels safe, it feels entertained, and it's relaxed. And that opens up the cognitive pathways to absorb that messy, authentic cultural data.
This raises an important question about how we have historically defined educational material.
How so?
Well, for decades, the industry standard was that educational audio had to be completely scrubbed clean of personality to be effective.
Oh, right. The classic language tapes.
Yeah. It had to be a script read by voice actors with perfect, unnaturally crisp diction.
Hello, how are you today?
Right, nobody actually talks like that.
But this source synthesizes why the lack of a script is exactly what makes the audio neurologically valuable.
Because life does not happen on a script.
Nope.
When you listen to unscripted, genuine human connection in audio, you are forcing your brain to rely on holistic processing. You aren't just decoding a perfect string of vowels.
Using all the other clues.
Right. You're using the tone of voice, the laughter, the pace to derive meaning. That is what allows a student to safely pick up on idiomatic expressions.
Yeah, a textbook teaches the formal, robotic way to say, "How are you doing today, sir?"
And you sound like a time traveler if you say that in a pub. Exactly. But unscripted audio, in a third place, teaches the fast-paced, slurred-together slang people actually use to greet their friends.
Which brings us directly to the physical act of shadowing.
Right. The paper emphasizes this as the key technique to use within this digital third place.
Yes. If you're sitting in your living room listening to a podcast that feels like a cafe conversation, you don't just passively listen.
You pause the audio.
You pause it and you literally mimic the speaker. You shadow them.
Okay. So step by step, what does that actually look like for our listeners?
It works like this. You listen to a short phrase. You don't worry about the translation yet. Remember, we are looking at the prosody.
The music, not the lyrics.
Exactly. You focus entirely on the sound. Then you repeat it out loud, trying to copy their exact intonation, the exact place they took a breath, the exact speed.
You're basically acting.
You really are. You're physically training your vocal cords and your brain to match the prosody of that metropolitan archetype we talked about earlier.
That's so cool. You get to try on the cultural archetype of London or Tokyo in the safety of your own home, completely shielded from the anxiety of a real-time conversation with a native speaker.
Which keeps that effective filter nice and low.
Exactly. Your effective filter remains low, but your active engagement remains high. It is just a brilliant sandbox for a beginner.
And because you are engaging with unscripted edutainment, you're shadowing authentic emotion. You aren't mirroring a bored voice actor reading a script.
You're mirroring a real person.
Right, someone expressing real enthusiasm, frustration, or curiosity. That emotional connection cements the neural pathways significantly faster.
It fundamentally changes the roadmap for anyone just starting out. You have to look past the textbook. The journey you are actually taking is an exploration of modern human behavior through these distinct cultural archetypes.
Exactly. By using unscripted edutainment as a digital third place, you actively shadow native speakers and build that psychological prosodic bridge to a completely new reality long before you ever memorize a conjugation table.
And it rescues you from the total information overload of rote memorization and, the dread of endless grammar drills.
It makes it fun again.
It does. By focusing your energy on the why of social interactions and the musicality of the culture, your learning becomes instantly engaging, dynamic, and deeply human.
It does require letting go of the need equations and trusting the messy process of human communication, though. But the payoff is the foundation for actual fluency, not just robotic recitation.
Absolutely. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about using this psychological bridge and these shadowing techniques to connect with the target culture.
Right.
But once you train your brain to actively listen to the unscripted idioms, the hidden pacing, and the emotional intonations of a foreign archetype,
Yeah.
how will it change the way you hear your own native language?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Will utilizing this third place ultimately make you a curious outsider, observing the unwritten rules and the hidden musicality of your own home? Keep diving deep.